all the EAPCET aspirants. So here we are to solve out the EAPCET previous year questions from the chapter Principles of Inheritance and Variation. So let's get started with the first question, wherein F1 generation resembles both the parents in this phenomena. In what phenomena? Both the parents will be resembled. In F1 generation, you can see out both the parental traits. It is observed in codominance, right ma, where we have learnt it with an example, that is ABO blood grouping, spotted and dotted seeds, right? ABO blood grouping. In ABO blood grouping, which type of blood group will show both the parental traits? AB blood group, right? Fine, right? And spotted and dotted seeds of lentils is one more example for codominance, where both the parental traits are exhibited or shown in the F1 generation. And if you look into the next question, that is, mutations in Oenothera lamarckiana plants was first identified by which scientist? Take your time and answer. Mutations in Oenothera lamarckiana plants was first identified by Hugo de Vries, which is option A. Next, this is multi-statement based question. Look into it and answer carefully. Choose the correct statement. Alleles are unable to blend with each other. Alleles are unable to blend with the other alleles. Correct only. Alleles slightly differ from the same gene. In the same genes, two alleles will be of two different types. Mendel's law do not provide proof of genes. True. And genes segregate independently. Okay. So the proof of genes is not provided. Genes segregate independently is correct only, and alleles are unable to blend with each other. They don't blend with each other. Alleles, they differ from each other in the same gene. Plural should not be used over here. So here the set of correct statements will be 1, 3 and 4, which is option C. Next question, match the genotypes for dihybrid progeny. Genotypes of dihybrid progeny. So if we take the phenotypic ratio, that is 9:3:3:1. I have given you out a ratio which will be easy for you to calculate any type of problems which are asked from dihybrid cross. So from 9 dominant, which are round and yellow, okay, 9 dominant traits which are round and yellow, which is capital R and Y, round and yellow, right? So this can be of heterozygous nature will be 4, one homozygous and the other heterozygous will be 2, and then as such vice versa, one homozygous and the other heterozygous will be 2 each, and purely homozygous will be 1, right? This ratios will be useful in whichever problem you get, right? And then 3, will be of one homozygous and the other heterozygous ratio, of which pure homozygous will be 1 itself, pure homozygous ones will be 1 each, and dominant trait heterozygous will be 2 each. And one will be completely homozygous, small r, small y, small y. Now it is easy to identify for you. The genotype with one homozygous and the other heterozygous will be 2. Of this genotype, how many are there? Capital Y and capital R small I will be 2 in number out of 16 offsprings. Okay. Next is of this ratio, heterozygous individuals, heterozygous dominant for 2 genes will be 4, not 1. So this will be wrong. And then homozygous for both the traits, recessive and dominant, will be 1 out of 16. Okay, it will be 1 out of 16. So 3 also will be wrong. 1 homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant will be 2 each. Okay, homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant, this type of genotype will be 2 each. So it is easy to remember, you can draw out easily from the phenotypic ratio of dihybrid cross all the possible combination of alleles. Just remember this and you can answer any question that comes from dihybrid cross. So here the right answer will be option 1 and 4. 1 and 4 will be the right answer. Option D is the right answer. Next question. Yeah, sickle cell anemia is an example of what? Sickle cell anemia, firstly tell me what is the type of disease it is. What type of disease? Autosomal recessive, right? Sickle cell anemia is an autosomal recessive disease. Okay. So this is an example of autosomal recessive disease which gives what? Point mutation. Sickle cell anemia is an example of what? Point mutation. Fine, right? Where the single gene will be disturbed here. Single base pair is disturbed here, because of which the disease occurs, which is point mutation. The term linkage was first coined by whom? Linkage. The term linkage is first given by the father of experimental genetics, that is Morgan, Thomas Hunt Morgan, which is option C. Next question, identify the correct Mendelian statements. So this is a multi-statement based question on Mendelian pattern of inheritance. Look into it and answer carefully. Identify correct Mendelian statements. F1 always resembles one of the parents, true. This is from Mendel's law of dominance. Recessive character expressed in the heterozygous nature, recessive trait or recessive character is always expressed in the homozygous nature only. Genes coding same trait are called as alleles. Yes, genes coding same trait are considered as alleles. Alleles separate during gamete formation. Alleles do separate during gamete formation, true. This we have learned from chromosomal theory of inheritance. So here what is the incorrect statement? Option B is incorrect. A, C, D are correct statements. Option D is right. Next question. Which was not part of Mendel's experiment? Mendel has considered 7 characters. What are they? Seed shape, seed color, pod shape, pod color, okay, and seed color, flower position, plant height. These are the 7 traits or characters that are considered by Mendel, of which seed size is not there. Seed size is not considered by Mendel. Fine, right? And then next question is about test cross. Phenotypic ratio obtained 1:1:1:1 is there in what? Test cross. So it is between round yellow heterozygous and wrinkled green homozygous. To identify the genotype of F1 generation, this is crossed with the recessive parent. So the cross is in between heterozygous individual and homozygous one, which is option B. Fine, right, ma? Next question. Again multi-statement based. Choose correct statements. Segregation universal in sexual reproduction. Segregation is universal law in sexual reproduction. True. Sahiwal cow selection. Example, Punnett square is by Punnett. True. Pea plant advantage is it is having self-fertilization. It can do self-fertilization, which is also known as bud pollination. Right. A is correct. Segregation is universal in sexual reproduction. Pea plant main advantage is self-fertilization or cross-pollination. Sahiwal cow selection, this is for artificial hybridization. Punnett square is given by Punnett, this is also true. So we can go with any of the combinations of A, C, which is not given. So we have to go with A, D. That is option D. Okay. Next. Identify the behavior of genes. Gene behavior we have to identify. One allele enters into each gamete. That is true. Each allele enters into the gamete. One allele enters into one gamete. True. Independent assortment is observed. Genes never modified. No, modified genes are present. Starch synthesis not single gene controlled. Yes, it is controlled by starch synthesis is not single gene controlled. No, it is controlled by a single gene, okay, which is learnt under the concept of pleiotropy. Starch synthesis is also an example of pleiotropy, where single gene is controlling many traits. It is controlled by single gene only. So option D is wrong. A and B are true, which is option A. Clear, right, ma? Any doubts anywhere? And then assertion reason type of question. If the allele produces a less functional enzyme and non-functional enzyme, the phenotype may be affected. If allele produces less functional enzyme or non-functional enzyme, yes, the phenotype will be affected. This is considered as the traits of what? Recessive allele. The phenotype or trait will be dependent on functioning, will not be dependent on the functioning of unmodified allele. No. Here what it means is unmodified allele means dominant allele, where these are the traits of modified allele, which means recessive allele, that is less functional enzyme or non-functional enzyme at all. These are the traits for recessive allele or modified allele. Clear, right? So here assertion is true but reason is false, which is option C. Clear, right? Next question. Identify the scientists. Just a second. Identify scientists who rediscovered Mendel's results. Mendel's results were rediscovered by three scientists. It is De Vries, Correns and von Schermach, which is option A and C. Option D is the right answer. Fine, right? Next question. Which is of again assertion reason type. two copies of gene are allelic forms and one allele produces non-functional enzyme. Okay, two copies of a gene are allelic forms and one allele produces non-functional enzyme. Modified allele is generally recessive allele. So the allelic form which is producing non-functional enzyme is what? Recessive allele. This is recessive allele. Modified allele is generally recessive allele. So assertion is true and reason is explaining about the recessive allele itself. A is true and R is the correct explanation of A. Option A is the right answer. Next question. Just look into this question now, which is again multi-statement based. And now, if we have to look into the correct statements from this multi-statement based question, F1 does not resemble either of the parents. Correct statement with respect to codominance and incomplete dominance. F1 does not resemble any of the parents. This is observed in incomplete dominance. New trait is expressed in F1 generation. F1 resembles both the parents equally. F1 resembles both the parents equally. This is observed in what ma? Codominance. Fine, right? F1 shows 3:1 ratio, that is not observed even in the monohybrid cross. Fine, right? So here C is applicable for codominance and A is applicable for incomplete dominance. It is option A, C and A. Fine, right? Next question. Assertion, reason, type again, ma. Go through the question. Take 1 minute of time and go through the question. When two genes lie on the same chromosomes, parental combination frequency will decrease. Yes, right? When two genes lie on the same chromosomes, parental frequency, combination of frequency decreases is an assertion. In reason, chromosomal theory of inheritance discovered variation due to sexual reproduction. Go through it once again. So here, two genes lying on the same chromosomes where the parental combination frequency decreases if the genes are far away from each other on the same chromosome. In that way, assertion will be right, but reason is wrong. It is not discovered due to sexual reproduction. Chromosomal theory of inheritance is to show about the chromosomal segregation, clearly stating out the Mendel's principles. Clear, right? So here assertion is true and reason is false. Next, in Drosophila, genes for body color and eye color are present on what chromosome? It is present on X chromosome of both female and males. Fine, right? And once again recall what are the two contrasting traits of body color and eye color. For body color, the traits include brown and yellow. For eye color, the traits include red and white. Clear, right? And then match the following type of questions of both list 1 and list 2. Here we go with change in single base pair. Change in single base pair is observed in what? Point mutation. Best example is sickle cell anemia, which is learnt under autosomal recessive disorder. Deletion of base pairs. Deletion of base pairs is seen in frame shift mutation. Generation of non-parental gene combinations is nothing but recombination, and frequency of recombination between the genes is known as what? Genetic map. Clear, right? This is the correct match which is asked in 2020. Just on the definitions and the concepts. Next question, which is again a multi-statement based question. Choose the correct statements. A single gene may be related to more than one character is called as pleiotropy. Yes, one gene affecting multiple phenotypes is known as what? Pleiotropy. A non-functional allele can be considered as dominant allele. Wrong. Non-functional allele is not a dominant allele. Functional allele is the dominant allele. When unmodified allele is the recessive trait. No, unmodified allele is the dominant trait. So, B will be wrong, right? Next, genes which code for a pair of contrasting traits are known as alleles. True, right? Genes which code for a pair of contrasting traits are known as alleles. C is true. Sahiwal cows of Punjab are the example of selection. They are the examples of selection in artificial hybridization. So, here A, C, D goes correct, which is option C. Option C is the right answer. Next question. Identify the genetic combination of the progeny. If a hybrid pea plant with round yellow seeds, so it is round and yellow seeds, hybrid pea plant is crossed with the pea plant having wrinkled and yellow homozygous seeds. So here first you look into the gametic combinations, how gametes are formed. Here in this heterozygous nature, from this heterozygous nature, you can get 4 types of gametes. What are they? Capital R, capital Y, capital R, small y, small r, capital Y, and small r, small y. These are 4 different types of gametes that are formed from this individual. And here if you look into the gametic combinations, it will be small r, capital Y. Okay, and here if you draw out, these are the possible allelic combinations. Fine, right? These are the possible allelic combinations. Now choose out the correct statement, the correct option, which is capital R or small r, capital Y, and 1 heterozygous, 1 recessive homozygous and homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant. These are the possible allelic combinations which are obtained from the cross of heterozygous individual and 1 recessive homozygous and 1 dominant homozygous genes. Clear, right? Next. To determine the genotype of a tall plant, F2 generation. To determine the genotype of tall plant in F2 generation, Mendel crossed a tall plant from F1 with dwarf plant. Mendel called this phenomena as what? Test cross. Test cross is to identify the genotype of F1 generation or F2 generation. Any unknown plant, if you have to identify the genotype, then we have to do what? Test cross. Next question. In a cross between homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant, the phenotypic and genotypic ratios respectively are. What are the phenotypic and genotypic ratios when there is a cross between homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant? Let us do it with one example with homozygous recessive and heterozygous dominant. What are the combinations that we are going to get? Which are the combinations of test cross only? No, we will get it as 1:1 ratio. Okay, 1:1, which is option A. Both phenotypic and genotypic ratios will be 1:1, as this is the example of what? Test cross. Look at this question, which is an application from dihybrid cross again. In Mendel's dihybrid cross, homozygous dominant round and yellow seeds. Round and yellow seeds, which are homozygous dominant, with homozygous recessive wrinkled and green seeds. What is the expected percentage of obtaining F2 progeny with wrinkled yellow seeds? He is asking you wrinkled yellow seeds in F2 population in the dihybrid cross. No linkage is there between these two genes. So if you look into the normal dihybrid cross, what is the ratio that we will get in 9:3:3:1? 3 offsprings of 16 progenies are of wrinkled and yellow seeds, of which one is of homozygous nature and the other will be of heterozygous nature, other two individuals. So here 3 out of 16 progenies are wrinkled and yellow seeded. So it is 3 by 16 into 100. Okay, 3 by 16 is to 100. How you are calculating this? The probability is taken like expected offsprings by total offsprings into 100. Expected by total offsprings into 100, which is approximately 19%. If you calculate 3 by 16 into 100, you will get somewhere around 18.5%, where you have to consider it as 19%. Fine, right? Clear? Any doubts anywhere? And then which of the following trait was not studied by Mendel in his work? Again, the trait which is not considered by Mendel is capsule shape, seed color, stem height, flower color, flower position and seed shape, okay, pod color, pod shape, all these are the traits considered by Mendel. It is not capsule shape which is considered. Next, so here the option will be 4. Next question. In a cross between true breeding homozygous, that is red flower, and true breeding homozygous white flowers, true breeding homozygous red with true breeding homozygous white, the F1 progeny will be what? Pink flowers. Okay, and the genotypic ratios of F2 generation is 1:2:1. This is because of what phenomena? This is the example of incomplete dominance, where F1 generation phenotypic expression is different from either of the parents. Okay, it is different from either of the parents, and it is nowhere expressing any phenotypic ratio of any of the parents. It is identical or unique. So that is seen in incomplete dominance. Here dominant genes are not completely masking the effect of recessive genes. Next. This is done. Next question. So many at times the questions are being asked from incomplete dominance itself. What is the possible phenotypic ratio in F2 generation when red flowers are crossed with white flowers? It will be 1:2:1, both phenotypic and genotypic ratios. Capital R for red, and these heterozygous pink for heterozygous nature for pink flowers, you will obtain 2 such flowers, and homozygous recessive is 1. Okay, let us cross it and see the self fertilization of heterozygous individuals of F1 generation. In F2 generation, what we will get? Okay, it is capital R, small r, and small r. Fine, right? This is what you will get in F1 generation, which is 1:2:1. Fine, right? And then last question of today's session, multi-statement based question again. The characteristic features of a plant with heterozygous nature are: it is a heterozygote resulted from dihybrid cross. No, it is from monohybrid cross. It represents genotype, true. The hybrids contain alleles which express contrasting traits. They don't express contrasting traits, they express only dominant itself. The 2 alleles are derived from the same plant, wrong. Okay, so here The right answer, the hybrids contain alleles which express contrasting traits. Not phenotypically, but genotypically we can consider this. So, it is option 2 and 3 which is B. Okay. So, here 2 and 3, option B is the right answer. The characteristic feature of a plant with capital T small t is B. Clear, right? Any doubts anywhere? So, that is all for today's session. In the next session, we will start with molecular basis of inheritance.